call him Medic.
Hello and welcome to the Medic podcast. This month, Medic is supporting the White Ribbon campaign. As a group made up of a lot of gamers, it's hard to discuss this cause and not address an issue which raises some big questions about the culture we're a part of, the responsibilities of developers, and the future of gaming. That's violence against women in video games. I'm Eve Beauregard, and before I introduce our guest for this episode, I just wanted to take the opportunity to acknowledge that this is a huge topic and we do only have a short time to discuss it tonight, so we'll be focusing on just a few key questions. All views expressed are those of the individuals, and Medic as a group will be engaging in a lot more discussion both surrounding video games and male violence against women over the course of the month. If you have a specific issue you'd like us to address, please feel free to let me know in the comments section. Now, without further ado, joining me tonight we have...
Scott Rhodie. I'm a digital communications specialist, and I've been gaming since 1978, which makes me old.
And I'm Leigh Harris. I run a studio called Flat Earth Games with my brother, and I'm the editor for Australia and New Zealand of Develop Online.
And I'm David Quinn. I've been a podcaster since 2005 and been playing games since the early 80s, and I have no thing like the kind of experience that these guys have.
Now, when I was thinking about how to begin this issue, at first I thought asking something as obvious as how might we be seeing violence against women depicted in video games was perhaps too simple or too obvious. But the more I thought on that, the more I realised how easy it is for us to watch and even interact with violence against women in video games without really noticing. One of the prime examples of that being when it's somehow justified within a paranormal or super exaggerated fictional narrative. Have you guys ever had that experience when you're playing a game or watching a cutscene and suddenly you realise that what's happening is actually quite confronting or perhaps wrong?
I think anytime you're playing games and you realise that the characters that you're fighting or whatever are probably, or they're female, there is a moment where you're like, oh shit, hang on. And I remember back to like Final Fight, one of the main characters that you are hitting more often than not is a female character in the little shorts and everything like that, hypersexualized. But yeah, there's hundreds of them wandering around the streets and you're beating the snot out of them. And that is a moment where you think, hang on, is it okay to hit them because they are dressed in a particular way? Or is it okay to hit them because they are your enemies and they're hitting you?
But then the question is, of course, who made them your enemies? And that would be the game designers who just arbitrarily decided so.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the character, but like she's turned up in Capcom games since, and is sort of the bad girl. But the fact that you just go around and take them out, and it takes a while before you realise, hang on, I'm this is a regular thing. I'm just beating the shit out of them.
Yeah.
I recently finished playing Shadows of the Damned, which is... I had to go back and play it because the legendary Suda51 has just such a reputation that I felt like my knowledge was actually waning and I wanted to be up to speed on the latest. I never played Lollipop Chainsaw or anything, but Shadows was remarkable. It not only managed to do the damsel in distress thing where the main character is trying to fight to get his girlfriend or significant other back or whatever, but the demon that takes her decides to turn her into himself so that you as the player are constantly being tormented. And it's deliberately trying to play on this, constantly being tormented by having to violently attack the person you're trying to save. It is trying to play on the trope, but it's ridiculously disturbing.
The whole idea of the mercy killing in that trope that women are asking you to kill them for their own good is just such a damaging and concerning...
That almost goes back to films, though, as well. I mean, and I know we're talking about games here, but you only have to go back to Aliens. There's a character in there who is aware of the fact that she's about to die horribly and begs, why is that a female character? Why isn't it a man who is cocooned to the wall and is about to...
Yeah.
So this question of begging for violence.
Because one of the most concerning statistics to do with violence against women is just how many people of both genders buy into that women are asking for or deserve violence, and it's sort of a trope that encourages that.
There was one example that just comes to mind is Mortal Kombat 9, which I really loved as a game. But very, very early on, you have to play as each of the different characters in the game at some point for about 3 or 4 fights.
Yeah.
And you play as Johnny Cage, the macho, self-loving dude, and he has an altercation with Sonya Blade where he makes an advance, she refuses, and that is the cue for a fight scene. Like, you actually have to beat the living crap out of her and win in order for the scene to progress to a point where she realizes that maybe she was overreacting and that everything is actually okay. It was probably one of the worst examples I can think of.
The refusal of consent means that you should beat someone up.
And
that makes everything okay.
Stopped until you you don't progress any further until you've actually beaten her.
So you have to beat some sense into her for turning you down.
That's
disgusting.
mean, there are heaps of fighting games these days where they're doing that, where the narrative is told through continued fights and so forth. But that's certainly the first one that I can't think of, Injustice. I don't think has any...
No, nothing like that. There's no
overt sort of...
No, there's no... Yeah, you've got to...
still have women that are dressed ridiculously.
Oh, look, you look at... If you take all the characters from beach volleyball, or what was it?
Dead or Alive.
Dead or Alive volleyball. That was just... As a gamer, I was... just felt really sad about it, but wasn't one of the previous versions you could actually change the size of their breasts?
You could change the amount that they jiggled.
But you go all the way back to my days, back when I was young.
Back in the Stone Age.
Back in the Stone Age, where we just had bits of rocks and moved them around like a screen type thing.
So when you were playing stickball, how is violence against women present?
Oh no, but
that's when you accidentally hit the girl next to you with the stick.
Custer's Revenge.
Oh God.
Which had simulated pixel rape is probably the best way to describe it. And that's the first ever. As a child, I didn't know what it was, but as an adult, when I look back at the games, that's the shocker that it could even be made.
Yeah, and even in the most basic system that it was just blocky pixels. Still, the idea is wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's, even now looking back, that's still one of the worst offenders.
Did anyone here happen to play the Devil May Cry reboot from the other year?
I didn't get to play it, no.
I
saw it.
I never played it.
I felt it was a button mashing game.
It was. That's the beauty of it. It just had there was the big bad demon enemy that you had to kill, and his mistress who was pregnant with his child. And it seemed to do this thing of taking all of the most delicate, sort of precarious things about gender and violence and roll them all into one. So not only did you have the kind of alien thing of motherhood and birth that was permeating the entire character, but when you had to actually face and kill this mistress demon, she was actually using the child inside her to come out and fight you, but it was the child never actually separated from her body. She just became this huge disfigured half fetus, half demon.
Oh, that's serious.
It's just awesome.
That's a lovely
Do you know what's funny? I mean,
femininity attack.
But I think what we're a lot of the games that we're talking about, if you look at a lot of the games we're talking about, a lot of them coming from Japan. Where their ideas of sexuality are very different from the West.
Well, interestingly though, the Devil May Cry reboot was UK. They got Ninja Theory, who are the people behind Enslaved, which has an interesting, which is Monkey. They've got this thing about doing Eastern games. I'm not sure what it is, but that was their take on this distinctly Japanese franchise.
Bizarre.
So speaking of that issue, it's a good way to move on to our next question. Do you think that developers have some kind of moral or social obligation to be mindful of the way they're interacting with women in games, and how we use female characters to progress stories?
Oh God, yes. I think one of the problems is most gaming industry, most gaming companies are male dominated, to a level of the nth degree. And when you put a whole bunch of men together, and they all work together and they come up with concepts together, and there's no female input, then it lacks 50% of 50% of the people you need to get to, but you're also just input from a whole sect of society.
I'd also say empathy,
Yeah.
understanding, because if they're not working with females, they're not going to have any kind of understanding of what.
Yeah, that's not to say that there aren't male game developers who are totally mindful and
No,
socially responsible.
I completely agree with that, but I still think you need the other point of view. That women and men think very differently.
Yeah, I think any business, regardless of what they're doing, needs to have diversity to do a good job.
There was also at GCAP down in Melbourne a couple of years ago, the keynote speaker was Sherry Grainer-Ray, who was over from, I think it was Texas, and she's been a huge advocate for women in video games for a long time, and her talk was fascinating. It was talking about how you could actually notice a statistically relevant difference in the number of Fortune 500 companies that have a decent representation of women and all kinds of other diverse backgrounds on their board of directors, and those who don't. And she was trying to translate the same thing over to gaming, I think quite successfully, in arguing that companies that have a more diverse range of people making their games are going to have a much more creative output than those who have a whole lot of very, very similar backgrounds and upbringings.
And they'll be much more successful.
And I think that even extends beyond the issue of sexism, just to all aspects of creativity.
Well, that's my response to your question is, should are video game companies more responsible, or should they be more responsible? I think everyone should be more responsible. It's almost, it needs to be an across the board thing. Filmmakers need to be more responsible, writers, everybody. But at the moment, because video gaming is so male dominated in the creative sphere, I think it'd be a lot healthier. How does it happen? How do we know?
The problem is it's going to take a long time, because it takes a long time for people to train and get into the industry. And plus, I think a lot of women might be put off from joining a massively male-dominated industry. It's similar to engineering. It's why there's one of my female friends studies engineering, and she is in a class with 95% male. Because that's what happens. And I think that until more girls join the industry and try and get in and get welcomed. I think that's the other key, is to get welcomed in. Things need to change. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, it's an entire cultural shift.
Yeah, and that's not a thing that happens over a short period of time.
Yeah.
That would be lovely if it did.
Well, luckily
it's definitely happening.
Yeah. But with the advent of, I think with the advent of mobile gaming as it stands at the moment, and the ability to make games for smaller budgets, I think that will allow more gamers to come through that cut their teeth on smaller games, and then grow into the next level.
I tend to agree, if for no other reason than really big companies that have been around for a really long time producing AAA games that are male dominated have also over a long period of time established their culture. And if those are the only major options to people entering the industry, these long-standing cultures that happen to have been male dominated, then there isn't really a whole lot of interesting welcoming points. The great thing about indies is that you can have really small teams of people who are just starting completely fresh, and the entire way that they relate to each other, all the developers in the teams, is malleable. It's all new.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I also think that unfortunately it also comes down to audience. At the moment, you're talking about AAA titles and so forth. AAA titles are still marketed to a very specific audience, and that is the teen to mid-30 male. And until such point as we start to shift the marketing and push it to say, yes, this is actually a AAA title that is as much aimed at female players.
And you hear it so much said that gamers don't want female protagonists, gamers don't want games made for women. But the thing is that I think the statistic is less than 50% of the marketing budget goes to games with female protagonists, and that's why they don't sell as well. It's immediately proportionate to how much is put behind.
It's probably poignant to talk about Tomb Raider at this point then. It's one of those very few games that has a female lead.
We're talking about the reboot from
Dynamics. The reboot,
I think she was always a woman, though.
What was...
she was just a bunch of triangles.
Tomb Raider was one I actually kind of wanted to bring up regarding your first question about being subjected to violence against women without realising it was going to happen. Because while Tomb Raider does cast you as Lara Croft, you're the protagonist, you're supposed to be kicking ass and taking names as Lara, it also had a lot in my mind in common with something like Hostel. You were going through all these tricks and traps, and when she died, she really died. You
sort
saw
of like torture porn,
yeah. And then at the same time you had that...
She didn't always die like that, though. She always died.
That's true?
Yeah, from
There's awful lot of panting and groaning and
it was oddly sexualized.
Always reminds me of that episode of Spaced where Tim got dumped, and he's it's funny, and I think it's a good example of the portrayal getting used for something else, which is where he gets dumped and his flatmate comes in and he's drowning Lara Croft under the water repeatedly. It says,
because
like
she made that noise.
Ex-girlfriend simulator.
And I'm sure that Simon Pegg wouldn't think he was. That was
committing violence against women, but he's contributing to that culture.
Indeed.
Whether
You
it's a
mentioned
joke or
the
not.
legacy thing. Lara Croft always died in a whole bunch of really horrible ways. So did Prince of Persia, and that's still...
Yeah.
Well, actually, no, they got a bit tame with that series.
You rewind it, though.
But I suppose one of the problems that we're dealing with is legacy, is tradition, is that we're trying to break out of this cycle. And the reboot of Tomb Raider would have been a really interesting place to make that stand.
Yeah, I know. I agree with you. I only played part of the game, and I mean, there's some scenes in it that are quite difficult to watch. I saw the whole thing played through. I just didn't actually partake in the gaming of it. Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of something that you mentioned earlier, David, the difference between video games and, say, film and books is that it's an interactive medium and it asks you to partake. And if that means that game developers do have more of a social responsibility because they're asking people to do something rather than just watch it passively.
I agree. I think you're right. Though there is also a point in books where you can be asked to sort of step into the role of the character.
Final Fantasy?
Well, or the choose your own adventure and stuff like that. But that's not really what I meant. I mean, at a certain point in books, quite often, if the book is written first person perspective and so forth, you kind of latch into the character.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But are you asked to do anything? No. And you're right. The fact that we are being led along a certain path and asked to do certain things is certainly it's a slippery slope, and it's a much more dangerous area because you're including player choice and the choice to do something or reward. You are rewarding the player for doing something. And I think that's when we go back to that Mortal Kombat 9 thing. You're rewarded with the story continuing by doing something.
Oh, that's not even a reward then. That's just like progress. Your game is over at the very beginning if you don't do this thing.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been plenty of games where we have seen reward for doing bad things.
Absolutely, or even just the fact that committing violence against someone can be to save them. Like as I mentioned earlier, when someone is possessed or they ask to be killed, and beating them up is for their own good.
But I think that it's kind of, I mean, I think that it's gotten worse as video game graphics and actual ability to see things in different ways has came forward.
When the experience becomes so much more immersive.
Yeah, I know we're still in the uncanny valley, world living in. But I think that the more realistic we get, the harder it becomes to separate it from the real life.
Yeah, that's an interesting point as well. Sorry.
You
just with technology like the Oculus Rift, if you're asked to beat someone up, if you're asked to beat up your girlfriend or your wife or something, is that crossing into a whole new territory of wrong because you're actually physically doing it and it's so much more real?
I have no doubt there'll be an Oculus Rift like Strangle Simulator or Death Simulator, which is deeply concerning.
Yeah.
But it will happen, and I hate to say it, there will be other stuff that comes out. There'll be sex games, there'll be all manner of stuff because that's what.
It's where
there's a subsect of people that get involved in that, and it's a horrible thing to say.
There's a market for it. There's going to be someone who sells the product. Yeah.
What I do find interesting there is that is the physical and the visual interaction, but the emotional interaction is the thing that gets me. That there are games, and we've all had conversations with people where they talk about what they've done in games, and they talk about it as if they've done it.
Mm.
You know, and especially when it is about choice and decision making and so forth. I mean, the game I've spent probably the most amount of time with in recent years has been the Mass Effect trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
My shepherd is different from anyone else's shepherd,
Mm-hmm.
and that shepherd is as much me as it is the character in the game.
develop so much more of an emotional investment in the
exactly.
character.
And for then that character to make a decision to cause pain or whatever to a female character, or to have to kill a loved one or something like that, that the emotional investment in it, I think is almost as dangerous as the visual representation of it, because that character is becoming an extension of you. They're becoming an avatar of you in a certain world.
Yeah.
And I think that is to me equally disturbing as the idea of just being able to strangle someone or whatever.
It's funny you say that. I mean, I remember playing. I struggled with Grand Theft Auto 5's torture scene. I really struggled with that. But strange enough, I tried to play Knights of the Old Republic. I played it through the light side, and then I tried to play the dark side, and I found I couldn't do the dark side. I actually struggled as a person to do certain things in it, because I was like, well, I get it's a game, but I just don't feel right doing any of this stuff.
You don't feel right acting it out.
Yeah, even at the beginning, getting that woman's the last things from her husband to sell them to give her some money, I felt bad that I was just supposed to keep it and not give her anything.
Yeah,
which is exactly what the developer's going for.
It says a lot about you as a person. You do wonder, because you've had a chance to live a life and get to the stage where you can actually feel those ways and make rational and moral decisions about things. You wonder about kids and more impressionable people playing these games and being taught that it's okay and sometimes even funny to commit these kind of crimes. You wonder how that affects their decision-making choices in real life.
It's funny that so in Grand Theft Auto, the torture scene I struggled with, but I can still drive down the road and knock people over without a problem.
Yeah,
but I don't feel connected to the people.
We're so used to playing games like that where you drive around and run people down, but it's a bit different when it's one-on-one.
Yeah, I think it's because when I'm driving a car in Grand Theft Auto, and there's men and women in front of you, and you run them over, you they're pixels. But when the torture scene was locked down into a certain frame, that you were forced to confront.
The guy actually had a character. He had a history.
Yeah.
He was feeling genuine fear and emotion at what was going on, which was certainly not the case when you're being running around in their playground killing people.
Just having silly fun.
I feel like that's something that's worth considering as well, is that although the player has a whole lot of agency over what's actually going on in these worlds, the parameters, the rules, are all still set by the developer. So what I tend to prefer to examine is not so much what you can do in video games, because you can slaughter people indiscriminately and who cares, it's just violent mayhem, but it's what you get rewarded for. And in the case of Mass Effect, for instance, the choices that you're forced to make as Shepard all have distinct results that the developers planned themselves, that are tied into moral lessons. They all have a very strong sense of context. And then we go back to something like Grand Theft Auto, and it's one of the things that's always kind of puzzled me about the series, is people's desire to look at it as something where you are beating women all the time, and what they'll show is someone who is in the open world where there are no rules and men and women are presented as equal. They'll show somebody electing to beat women in the same way that Simon Pegg was in Spaced, electing to do something that wasn't giving him a reward.
There is, of course, the option in Grand Theft Auto to sleep with a prostitute to increase your health and then kill her to get your money back, which is
Did you get your health back in the fifth one? I think you just got. I think in the fifth one, I think you just got sexual pleasures.
It's still kind of bad.
And then you can kill her. Yes, but I think I'd love to see my stats for the games. I'm sure I killed way more men than women in the game.
But yeah, it does raise the question of the difference between it being optional and being required to progress, and whether that makes it more acceptable, or if it's just as bad that you're given the option to play out those kind of power fantasies and violent behaviours.
Well, I think the next game, should they bring in male prostitutes?
That's a good question.
It's
I never thought I'd say that. Really, it's kind of strange thing to say. But there should be equal opportunities prostitution in the game.
Yeah, but at the same time, does equal opportunity prostitution actually solve any problems?
No, it doesn't. Everybody
the
wins.
ability to still have sex with them and then kill them and get your money back is still an issue.
The difference between that is that we don't have a history of violence against men and the objectification and commodification of men in video games. So when you see that, it doesn't really make up for the fact that women are so frequently beaten and killed for the sake of plot progression, for example.
You're entirely right. There was I remember one of my housemates a couple of years ago was watching me play Dead or Alive 3, I think it was.
You disgust me.
I know. It's a brilliant game. I love it. But she saw me playing as I think I was playing as a female character, and I was getting the crap beaten out of me by a computer, and she found the images to be quite disturbing. And my defense at the time was to go, wow, well, everyone's balanced, though. It's a fighting game. They're all just as strong as each other. And she's like, yeah, but the representation that's going on here is very, very different. It doesn't matter if the game's balanced or not. It means a hell of a lot. It's an incredibly different thing to have violence being visited upon a woman in a game as it is to have violence against a guy.
Is that something you guys agree with? With the difference between a female character being depicted as dependent and a victim and being an equal, whether it makes a difference to inflict violence upon them?
Well, so I come from Scotland, which is very much a matriarchal society. Yeah, but it is Scotland. The Scottish households are led by women. You don't mess about with them, and I think, and I know Mark Searles agrees with me here that from Kotaku that we both see it very similar. That in Scotland, women are very strong and in the forefront of our mind as growing up, and I think violence against women. I've seen women punched in the street. I've seen women punch women. I've seen men punch women in the street. And growing up in a rough city like Glasgow, it's not pleasant anyway. But then again, I also find a guy punched is not pleasant either. But where we come from, having that women are strong thing, and we see them as equals. I think that either way, if a woman, somebody hit my mother or my sister, even if it was equal and it was another woman, I'd still be shocked by it and appalled, and I'd want to. Don't know.
It's just it's important to bear in mind when considering any images or narratives that include violence against women that we're still living in a reality where for most women the most likely form of violence to get visited upon them will be from their significant other.
Yeah, I think it's something like 1 in 5 women in Australia will experience domestic abuse.
That's such a horrendous stat, isn't it?
It's disgusting.
It is. And the other thing is that it's so often combined with sexual violence, and that violence is also a path to sexual gratification or something like that, which I find equally disturbing. But so seeing any kind of violence, and even if it is on toe-to-toe terms, and if it is a character that is, Sonya Blade, who's strong and equally capable and perfectly balanced, but that's the thing, they are very sexualised. There are so few games that present the female characters in ways that aren't hypersexualised.
I actually can't think of any fighting games that have women in it that aren't sexualised.
There's a character.
The only one.
A single character, not a whole.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, so that's in itself.
A character in.
So I'd go way back. See, I was going to go way back and say, but mainly because you can't really see them that much, and I would say Gauntlet, because the Valkyrie is just like a square.
But if you look at the artwork on the game box,
true.
She is Red Sonja.
What's weird, but I was going to say, if you take it back to movies, I struggle to think of any female leads in the movies. Even Long Kiss Goodnight is sexualised. She's sexualised. The only movie I've ever seen I can think of where a woman is equal or more so than men is Haywire, with the MMA actress, and she's at no point in the movie did I think of her as a victim or anything. I just saw it as a force.
There has been at least one female character in Soul Calibur that was presented wearing full armor, full plate armor, and it wasn't feminized or anything like that. It was just a female character wearing armor.
Yeah. What was her second outfit?
Yeah,
see.
Though I do actually have a memory of going back, and this is one of those moments where you realise that there was a gender difference in gaming. I think it was Mortal Kombat 2, or it may even have been 3. There was a point where Johnny Cage could do a splits punch and punch to the groin. It wouldn't work on females. He wouldn't punch.
Yeah, that was actually all the way back to Mortal Kombat 1.
Was it number 1 as well? Was it? Yeah. And that was one of those things that I realised that there was a gender differentiation made. And yeah...
Is that a positive thing or a negative?
I don't know. I'm really not sure. Because the fact of the matter is, if you punch anyone in the groin, they're going to double over and go, "Oh, that hurts."
It's sort of a form of sexual assault.
Yeah. So in some ways, I guess maybe they're going, he doesn't do sexual assault.
Well, that's interesting, though, to think that the developers actively said, we don't want to watch a man punch a woman in the groin.
Was it only him, though?
I think they got over that, though. I'm fairly certain Johnny Cage can punch whoever he wants in the groin these days.
There are, even in later games.
Really?
The female characters do different things.
Huh.
I'm almost 100% certain that there are slightly different animations for female characters in Mortal Kombat 9 with the X-ray moves.
On that note, do you guys have any examples of games that you think did a particularly good job of handling the issue of violence against women?
I know, that's weird. Isn't that weird?
That silence bad.
Yeah, that is. I can't. Oh, man.
See, I go back to Mass Effect, but it's not so much the violence against women. It's the fact that handled a female lead character in a way that was wonderful, in the sense that Femshep is equally competent and equally capable and equally represented as being a hero and a saviour for the galaxy as male Shep.
Except that she's not allowed to just be called Shep. She's
still Femshep. Yeah. But that, I guess, but that's only by the fans.
I'm fairly certain that BioWare and EA have actually referred to her quite publicly as Femshep.
But not in game. She's still just Shepard in game.
In game, yes.
Yeah.
And
I'm purely talking about marketing.
Yeah. Which is another point altogether, how we think about studios as a whole, whether we think about their marketing approach to it or whether we just judge it by the game itself.
Yeah. So the difference here is marketers can be right bleep holes sometimes. He says, as a man who works in marketing.
It's okay for you to say.
But that's because they look at demographics, they look at breakdowns, they go, well, who's our audience? How do we capture this audience? And one of the problems here is that, a true marketer creates a product that people want. A bad marketer knows his product. A dodgy marketer knows his product shit, and then makes it so that it sells by, converting the truth into something else, or pushing an angle that then sells the product. And I think that if you go back, I always say Apple is my example of good marketing, where they created a product that people wanted. They always, Steve Jobs always wanted to create something that people wanted, and he didn't use a lot of research to decide it. He just went, I think that people would like this. Let's build something that people will like. And I think you look at some of the games. I look at that the zombie games, the Riptide one that had that bust of the woman zombie. Yeah, that was just hideous. Was it Riptide?
It was Dead Island.
Yeah, Dead Island.
I was writing about games news at the time at like an industry level, and I was quite happy to just kind of go, right, let's not. Because that was I found that deeply appalling and offensive. Yeah, I saw people defending it, and I was like, how can you defend it? It's a highly sexualized bust of a busty woman who's a zombie. And there's bits ripped off her, and she's obviously been attacked as well. I just
yet
find
still sexualized.
Yeah, and the thought that someone would want that in their home is really rather disturbing.
Yeah,
but yeah. Speaking of people defending it, it's an interesting thing about the game community and gamers as a whole, and that they very much don't want change. It seems often when it comes to gender issues, you'll hear a lot of people saying, "Oh well, it doesn't affect me. I don't care if it's a woman or a man. So why should we care if it's a woman or a man?" And to me, I always come back at them, well, if you don't care, then why do you care?
Yeah.
Why is it an
Yeah.
issue for you if we want to have, say, more female protagonists or less use of women as
'Cause they-
objects
yeah,
to progress the plot of the male protagonist?
Because they do care.
This is a really simple example that I was a little bit shocked by. I wrote a blog post a little while ago, but probably only a couple of weeks ago now, where I mentioned that traditionally when we look at things, it was just something I remembered learning back at uni. The thing that is on the left is considered the normal, and the thing that is on the right is considered the alternative or the
It's
variant.
the expectation, reality.
Yes, exactly that. And it just had to do with like semiotics of advertising, how you lay out a page and all that sort of
Which is
stuff.
interesting because that doesn't translate in Japan.
No, purely a Western thing.
Yeah.
Purely a Western thing. But I remember I wrote a blog post just pointing out that one subtle difference I made with my first game was at the character select screen. There was two options, a male and a female character, and the female character was on the left. And that was a conscious decision that I made because I wanted her to not be the alternative.
High five.
I did not get... I got a whole lot of people saying that was fantastic, thank you for writing that, but there was some really horrible comments directed at me for something which, at the end of the day, means nothing to people on the other end. So it just... When you're saying, why do you care so much, that was what I couldn't help but thinking. Like, why does it matter so much to you that I have chosen to make this tiny change in my game? I'm not saying you have to do it as well. This was other developers, by the way.
Oh, wow.
These comments.
Really?
It's funny. I've been on a video games forum for
Longer than you'd care to mention?
about 14 years now, 13 years, and it's a UK-based one. The Tropes versus Women video game, the whole Kickstarter project that was done. I look at that, and the thread's now like 120 pages long. People are still, even in the forum today, they're still bringing up the fact that she doesn't really play games. She's not a gamer, and I'm like, well, that shouldn't matter.
It's an academic study.
So they're busting out the fake geek girl.
The fake geek,
Is
and
that
then,
what they're
There's a whole other
and there was a whole everything that and I've seen the comments go back and forward, and some of the guys that I used to respect so much, just their views on it. We should be defending against this. I'm like, well, no, we should be supporting this. This is what we want. We want more people understanding why games are becoming like this.
Yeah, and I think that the most important thing with that kind of issue is, regardless of whether you agree with 100% of what she's saying, it's hard to disagree with the idea of discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I was a backer. I
was
very
a backer,
much support
the
whole thing.
The whole series in preparation for this, actually.
You're a backer?
I don't actually know what it is.
Okay, I'll send you links too.
Please do.
Yeah, it's good.
Essentially, she's a journalist. Was that what she was eventually? Just a blogger?
I think she was a blogger, and then I'm still going to call her a blogger. Being an ex-journalist, I'm quite protective of the word journalist.
She's a blogger. she started a Kickstarter to make these videos about tropes versus women in video games, where she essentially discusses things like the damsel in distress.
I'm sorry, I just came up with a game that actually handles violence against women really well.
Good, thank you, because I'm really
sorry. Raid. Has anyone?
I love Raid.
The idea is that you've got this damsel in distress who.
High five there.
You've got this damsel in distress character who's, the girlfriend of the main character, and you're going through all these levels trying to get to her. She's trapped in a castle, and the whole game is really time bending. And I should just stress that there is a bit of a spoiler here. Well, a pretty big spoiler, but it's kind of important to make the point. When you actually do reach her in the castle, you've been going through from the left hand to the right hand of this whole platforming game. You get to her in the castle, and she's horrified to see you because you've been aggressively chasing her, and she hasn't wanted you to. And she starts running backwards through the level from right to left, and you're chasing her again from right to left, suddenly with the full knowledge that you're actually in the shoes of this particularly creepy character who's been obsessing over a woman.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's very similar to Shadow of the Colossus.
I don't know if I could keep playing.
That was the big finale.
Yeah.
That was the big reveal. It didn't go on after that.
There are other examples of female empowerment, like the Zelda series, where who's the character?
Zelda.
Well, Zelda becomes
Big Mouth Sheik.
Sheik, yeah.
Who is Zelda? Yeah.
Yeah, and there is that, like this extremely empowered, cool character who you're like, that person is great. Apart from the fact that they do present her as a male until such point.
Even so, you would think that the very fact that the princess has to change her identity in order to be someone who can kick ass is sort of concerning, and she's very much a damsel when she is herself.
Yeah, true.
It's a fairly obvious example, I suppose, but Gone Home, it was a story specifically of female empowerment. It was you playing in first person as a female protagonist who arrives home at the family home in the middle of the night, and it's a thunderstorm and everybody's out, and you're just roaming around the home collecting all these little notes and fragments of memories and things that piece together who you are and your relationship to the other main character, which is your younger sister. And as you progress through the game, there's no enemies or anything to kill. It's purely just exploration within this house. And as you progress through the game, you slowly start to piece together that your younger sister had started a relationship with another girl, and her parents weren't accepting her, so she had to get it together and move out of home because she wasn't being accepted there. And it was essentially a story about the younger sister, even though the protagonist was you, the older.
I think one of the first games I remember playing a female protagonist who felt equipped to deal with things, although at the beginning not so much, would probably be Silent Hill. As terrifying and pant-wetting as it was when I played it in the dark with my headphones on.
Silent Hill 3 or Silent Hill 1?
1.
Oh, yeah.
On that same vein, Project Zero, which is, for me, the scariest game I've ever played, cast you in the role of a young woman who was trying to save her older brother. However, she was wearing a ridiculously short skirt.
Because I think we was wearing jeans and a top, just, and, that noise of that radio crackling still freaks me the hell out.
So another question, speaking about the relationship between the sisters in Gone Home, is the way that often the relationships between the protagonist and the damsel or whoever the female character is cast as, it's often a romantic relationship, and whether this saturation of violence can skew young people's perspective of what a romantic relationship should be, whether it hinges on something like victimization and disempowerment of women. If we think that that's something really concerning.
Certainly, I think there is an unhealthy expectation that you have to be able to save somebody for there to be a romance.
And that your masculinity hinges on protecting a woman who can't fend for herself. Yeah.
You know, it's sad. Most men think that way. Because society tells us... Yeah. I'll be honest, this comes from me who's absolutely crap at relationships. But I think that, it's sad that society tells us that as men, we must protect the women and save the women and do all this. And, as I get older, you realise more and more that it's not about that. It's about equality, that you both think very differently, don't get me wrong.
And that sort of brings us back to the idea of developers being culturally and socially responsible, whether we should be working harder to combat that kind of attitude and promote women as their own entities that can protect themselves and not just motivators for someone else to commit violent acts or be heroic.
And then you see things where they've clearly gone, okay, we want a female lead character and we want them to be strong, we want them to be powerful, and you get Lollipop Chainsaw. And you're like, except
with Mirror's Edge.
True.
That's another great example.
And wanted the protagonist to be a dude. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
The story studio wanted the protagonist
it was,
to be
so it was DICE who were fighting for Faith to be the character that we now know her to be, and they also went out of their way to try and not give her the usual sort of stereotypical body proportions and all that sort of thing.
Her design was really cool.
And the studio was fighting tooth and nail against it. It's not exactly a happy ending story though, because the game tanked. It did not sell at all, but it did.
That's because it made people want to vomit.
Have you played it on Oculus Rift?
No, blah.
But she was also out to save her sister.
But you can also look at Portal then in the same vein, albeit you never really...
Until you see yourself in a reflection.
Yeah.
But then you go back to Metroid.
Yeah,
that beautiful moment where you play through the most part of the game and you're like, I'm tough, I'm shooting everything, I'm a chick, sweet.
And then you have Zero Suit.
Yeah, and then it undoes it all because
Yeah.
there are so many times that you're getting so close. You're getting so close to doing it right.
I think we're getting closer. You know,
I hope so.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
please. I think that hopefully, as time goes on, it'll become more. Just a balance. That's all we ask for.
So what can we do as a community to show that this is important? Whether it be if you're working in a studio or if you're a viewer or just a fan, what would be the right course of action to try and get rid of this?
I think if you're a developer of a game, no matter where you work, and you believe it's important, then you need to stand up and make your voice heard. You know, I think one of the problems is people who work in big companies are scared to maybe voice their opinion. But
especially in the games industry, everyone wants your job, I think.
Yeah.
So.
And also I'd say marketers, stay the hell away from games. Let them get built and then market them.
Yeah, don't get involved until the game is finished.
Yeah.
That's an intriguing idea. Yeah.
Leigh, could you give us any insight as to whether that's actually possible?
I'm not sure. I mean, I kind of cut my teeth in the industry working in PR, so knowing what's going to fly and what isn't was kind of my bread and butter for such a long time that now that I'm a developer, when we're in the early concept stage, I'm still sitting there going, okay, here's something that'll be palatable, here's what people will accept, and here's what they won't. For us, though, when I'm thinking along those lines, it's mostly about genre, it's about the style of gameplay, the camera perspective. When it comes to gender, though, both myself and my brother, who runs the studio with me, have a very sort of firm position on it, which is screw you if you actually have any burning desire to only play a male in a video game. All of our games so far have been you pick an avatar, either male or female, but I'm certain that when we actually get to a point where we have characters in our game, because we're still mega low budget, that we're going to be happy to just go, screw it. We're going to make people play a female character, and if they're afraid of that, we don't want them as our fans.
Well, I mean, if they're afraid of that, there are thousands of other games for them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Every time I look at the arguments that happen online, I realise how far away we are. And
I find a lot of time I'll say this, that the gaming community, the most vocal are the ones with time in their hands, and that's the ones that are probably still at high school.
Yeah, and they're also on the internet, and there is the whole anonymity of the internet and the idea that you can say whatever you want. And I think like 90% of these really extreme things that are said, whether it be rape threats against females, or whether it be people taking issue with having to deal with these feminists in the community trying to ruin all their games. I don't
crazy
think
feminists.
I don't think that many people would actually say that to anyone's face.
No.
It's important also to recognise that at Valve, they decided specifically to make a character that had very few attributes at all, a female character, and it wasn't that they didn't flip a coin. And because by default so many people in the industry think or conceive of the main characters as being by default male, that was actually that was a significantly progressive act. I dare say there were people who would identify as feminists who made Portal. Would you say that the creators of Portal are busy ruining gaming for everybody?
Exactly.
No.
I think they're doing something special.
And I think it's important to mention that it's very easy to enjoy a game without looking at it through the sphere of gender and without looking at it thinking about violence against women. And that's not to say that all the games we've mentioned haven't been good games. It's just that they do exist to perpetuate this cultural problem that we have.
I played Call of Duty Ghosts at the weekend. I'm really sorry. But I'm trying to think, I don't remember any female characters in it whatsoever.
I think Call of Duty made a big deal about actually introducing female characters after Ghosts, I think, because I remember people were up in arms about the lack of female characters in Ghosts in particular.
I can't think of any.
There weren't any, and the reason why people were so upset about it is because they were going, okay, so you're telling us it's too hard for you to introduce female characters, kind of the same line of argument that Ubisoft has about Assassin's Creed Unity, but yet you're willing to let us play as a dog. What does that tell you about the hierarchy of importance there?
And the dog bit was really stupid and dumb as well. But I just it hadn't crossed my mind during the game till this conversation. There was not, because I was thinking about it earlier on. My friend texted me and he said, I've got a new Microsoft phone and I'm talking through Cortana to you. And I was like, oh, right. And I thought about Halo, and I thought about, because Cortana's a really strong female character in a sense, and I always found she was, although an AI.
And almost naked.
And totally without sort of her own agency.
And got curvier and curvier.
Well, yeah, I found that weird. Yeah. But still, in the first Halo, which I'm replaying at the moment, she's just a voice in my head that's nice and keeps me going, because she's like your conscience in a sense.
Yeah.
And I like that about it. You know, she guides you. Whereas, when I played Ghosts, I was just like, I feel like I'm in a world of macho times macho times macho, and it's unpleasant.
Do you think that softness and the sense of being conscious and a moral compass, do you think that would be different if it was a male?
No, I think a good male voice can guide you as well.
So as long as it's not Peter Dinklage voice acting, then you'll be fine.
I've not heard that yet. I'm not listening to it yet. I'm waiting for Destiny. I'm trying not to listen to anything about Destiny.
I'm perfectly comfortable with being told what to do by Yuri Lowenthal, who is the narrator on Disney Infinity.
Right.
And a good friend. So
Actually,
I know that voice. I'm doing everything he tells me to do.
I have no qualms about the man or woman telling me what to do.
It's interesting, actually, that one of the tropes versus women that I don't think Anita Sarkeesian is going to touch on, I vaguely remember the list of episodes she plans to make, is the idea of the female character as your personal assistant. The voice in your ear to guide you through everything. Yeah. I kind of remember...
secretary.
Smuggler's Run, which was a game from 2000 for PS2. It was a Rockstar game, just before GTA 3, before Rockstar became a household name. It was a racing game where you had to get from checkpoint to checkpoint in an outdoor open world. Like, very fun, dune buggies, all that kind of stuff. And for some reason, the voice that was telling you to get from one checkpoint to the next was not only female, even though there was no real story, she didn't have much of a character, but she was breathing really heavily, and she was overly sexualized to the point where I couldn't help but look at it and go, this is hilarious. This is
intentional.
Parody.
That's parody.
I actually thought it was totally satire. There was no way that you would have that much sexy talk and heavy breathing when there's no purpose for the character even existing unless you were making fun of it.
That would be the Scottish sense of humour then. Because that would have been Rockstar North.
San Diego.
Oh, was it San Diego?
Then we have no idea. We're lost.
Not everything good comes from Scotland.
No, but a lot of the humour from Grand Theft Auto comes from the Scottish side of it all.
It's just messing with you.
I know, but I'm very protective of my home country. But a lot of the humour there's a humour in Grand Theft Auto 3 and 4 that most people won't even get. But it's very, very localised to Scottish humour with certain phrases and terms, and even the names of shops that you guys, stuff like Fudpuckers and stuff, is stuff that
I think we get it.
No, yes, but Bob Ag and stuff was used a lot, and things that are very Scottish colloquialisms. And again, the style of the game is weird because we always go back to GTA, and you think, and I think about Rockstar North and the way that we see matriarchy, and how we see strong female people in our lives, and I think about the conscious decision that they move from when they move from 1 and 2 to that third Grand Theft Auto, which is the first when you can start picking up prostitutes. Might be something to do with the fact that the studio moved from Dundee to Edinburgh, where near their offices.
This is a very Scottish reference.
Yes, sorry.
Which we're all looking at you.
But they moved from a small little town to Edinburgh, which you're probably all aware of, which has a higher prevalence of ladies of the night type things.
I knew you were going to use that.
Yes, I guess. And I think, if I remember rightly, because at the time when GTA 3 was, I was a journalist in the UK, and there was a lot of attacks on prostitutes in Scotland at the time.
This is something I want
and that's where I always thought, though, that they took what was happening in the real world and put it into the game as that kind of that violence can happen to the girls.
And then you'll often see the media take that and say, look, people are killing prostitutes because of Grand Theft Auto.
But they have a tendency to conflate the ability to do something with the
desire.
direction or the
Yeah.
incentive to do something.
And that's where I always thought that that's where it came from, because I remember that there was a whole slew of attacks at the time, and I always thought that must be what the reason behind it, to try and push into the forefront, and it does happen.
Without that cultural context in the rest of the world, it's not, doesn't make as much
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
I don't think I credited them with that. I just thought it was kind of window dressing. I thought
No,
they
see.
thought it would be hilarious to have a camera just sitting there while a car bounced up and down because sex is funny. I don't think they thought it through, really.
I disagree. I think they might have, because at the time it was one of the prevalent news stories in a row type thing.
Well, I mean, game studios don't exist in a vacuum, so they're always going to be influenced by the social and cultural context that they're in.
Well, my concern is that there is that particular act of sleeping with a prostitute and then killing them. Does it award you stars in terms of, are you then on the police's radar?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, right. So there's
a level of consequence for your actions.
Yeah.
Right, because that's the thing that kind of
Even
concerned
if
me a
it's
little
fun
bit.
to evade the consequence.
It's and that's sort of the driving away and having a good time. But in any other system, in any other world, the person who does that is Jack the Ripper. The person who does that is not in any way capable of being a hero again.
It's hard to imagine in a film, for example, watching the protagonist sleep with a prostitute and then kill her and still have them be the hero by the end of the story.
It doesn't work.
Well, but they're anti-heroes.
Psycho, maybe?
Still,
American
I'm
Psycho.
not sure that
doesn't
many
work.
people
He's
look
not
at
a
it
hero.
and think, I want to be like him.
Yeah.
Sadly, I know a bunch of people that think like that.
Well, that might say more about the people that you know.
No, I don't disagree with you. I wouldn't say. I'd say I've known them. I would class them as friends. I would class them as acquaintances.
I've come to regard you as people I know.
Are you saying this for legal reasons?
Yes, I'm saying this for legal reasons. But I would say that their thought process, I think, from the world that they come from, is very insular, and because of that, and they've got a very condensed view of the world, and I think it comes from a liberal mindset.
Big L or little L?
Big L.
Right.
Where
so
they
conservative.
Yeah, where they see things very differently, and they it goes back to even a recent discussion, and I'm going a bit off course here, but even a recent discussion about Tinder, where they said, I'd never use Tinder because I want to meet a girl the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, Tinder being the dating application.
Yeah, and they're like, I would never tell my family I met a girl online, and I was like,
which is so funny in 2014.
Yeah, and I said, what's the stigma attached to meeting someone online? Oh, they could be freaks, and I realised that their world.
Not anyone you meet on the street.
Yeah,
it's probably slightly more like that.
But I realised that their world's so insular that they don't perceive that anything's changed in the last 50 years.
Which raises the question, when you think about playing video games, so many of us that are talking about it, we can easily say, just because I did something violent in a game doesn't mean that I'm going to do it in real life. Yeah. But there are people that are more easily influenced, and not everyone makes rational decisions. No,
I agree, and I think, and I've said this before when I've defended violence in video games and defended. Whenever there's a shooting or something, I've defended violence in video games because it's always timely. But I realise more and more that as more people play video games, there's going to be more people who are mentally unstable, who are influenced. But these same people would have been influenced by a movie. These same people would be influenced by a book, by a conversation.
And do you then ban any kind of expression that isn't totally safe for everyone if they're mentally unstable, just because some people might be influenced by it?
What you do is you make sure society can recognise these people and then help them and deal with them.
More about
and what you do is you encourage developers and consumers to have a great deal more responsibility with the way that they handle things like gender representation in their games. That's not to say that you can't have the most violent video games out there, or violence against women. There's no reason why video games can't tackle some really seriously heavy themes. It's certainly not an argument for censorship to point out that some people take messages in video games the wrong way or use them to fantasize. It's just a matter of being aware of that when you're creating them and thinking about the potential repercussions.
Yeah.
I think that's a good note to end on. Thanks very much, guys, for your insight. And if you'd like to learn more about the White Ribbon Campaign, you can find Medic at facebook.com/mediccharity or on Twitter @mediccharity. We'll be discussing how this issue affects you and I, and what we can do to create a cultural shift towards a future without male violence against women.